Welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Erica Ford. You hear from me all the time, I'm sure. I am a career coach for international students. I do that as my full time job. And here on TikTok, I am here to help international students locate international friendly job and internship experiences and navigate the limitations of their student visa to do so. And I am joined today, I'm so glad to be joined by attorney Xavier Francis, who himself immigrated into the US as a teenager, if I remember reading that correctly, from Jamaica. He is an immigration attorney, and he's here to present to you all today about visa pathways for international students after OPT. And I want to throw in that J1 students could potentially be involved in this conversation as well, but most international students here in the US are on F1 visas and therefore doing OPT. I'm going to read my formal introduction because I feel like that is appropriate. So, Xavier Francis is the founder and managing attorney at Francis Law, a Juris Doctorate from George Washington University Law School, coupled with his personal narrative as an immigrant, fuels his dedication to guiding students through the immigration maze, ensuring regulatory compliance and a smoother path to their immigration goals. You can follow Xavier on Instagram, and I'll have that pulled up shortly, at xfrancislaw. Today, Xavier, as I mentioned, will present on immigration paths for international students in the US after OPT. At the end of the session, he will take questions, and throughout, he'll take questions from students in the audience. Go ahead and submit your questions at the link in my bio, please. I'm going to turn it over to Xavier, and I'm going to flip my camera around so you'll be able to hear me if needed. But welcome, Xavier. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Erica. I really appreciate the warm welcome. And hello, everyone on TikTok. Thanks for joining. What is high skilled immigration? So, as we know this, right? So, typically, when we think about or immigration to the US, we think about it within the context of family reunification, asylum, humanitarian relief. But I don't think we pay enough attention to the opportunities that exist through employment, investment, entrepreneurship. Many of you are international students, and you will go off into the world and work for different companies. Some of you might start your own businesses. Some of you might invest in businesses, and you can use that expertise to get a green card, right? And sort of prolong your time here in the US if you want. The challenge is figuring out what option is the best option for you and how to get there. And that's the purpose of today's session. We're going to talk about the main visa categories that you can pursue or look into after graduation. Can you move to the next slide, please? So we are going to talk about a few things. Self-sponsorship versus employer sponsorship. We're going to talk about the work visas, and then we're going to talk about the green cards, because obviously we know that the green cards is the ultimate goal. But sometimes having a work visa is a short-term alternative or short-term solution to the long-term goal, because as many of you already know, it could take at least several years to obtain a green card through the employment-based process. I waited for 12 years to get my green card, and I always tell my clients that I don't want them to wait for that long. So while you're here working on that long-term green card strategy, you can take advantage of some of these temporary work visas that we'll talk about. So let's move on to the next slide. So within immigration law, especially employment-based immigration, you have two ways of going about pursuing permanent residence. You can pursue it through self-sponsorship or employer sponsorship. Self-sponsorship means that you're applying for that green card without the help of a third party, which means you don't need a spouse, a family member, or an employer to sponsor you or petition for you for a green card. You're doing it based on your own merit, right? And so there are certain visas out there that allow you to self-sponsor. Alternatively, you have an employer sponsorship. So this is using the help of a company or a U.S. employer to sponsor you for a green card, right? And this is probably more common than self-sponsorship. I think in the past 3 years, self-sponsorship has become a lot more popular. But there are pros and cons to each. I think the biggest advantage when it comes to self-sponsorship is that it gives you more flexibility and control over your immigration journey. Because what if you're laid off from your company, right? What if you change your rules? Your employer could withdraw your green card process, and that would impact your long-term immigration plan. When you're self-sponsoring, it doesn't matter if your company lays you off or if you change your job or if you move to a new company, that is your self-sponsored green card petition and that is yours to keep. So I think self-sponsorship is a more ideal solution than employer sponsorship, but sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes we have to rely on employer sponsorship, and we'll talk about that as well and some of the pathways there. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about the temporary work visas that you can pursue after graduation. So many of you are students, you'll have 1 year of OPT, and if you're a STEM major, you'll have another 24 months of STEM OPT, right? So it gives you around 3 years. The question is, what happens after those 3 years? What's your plan, right? Typically what we see is students apply for one of the following work visas after the OPT expires. And it allows you to continue living and working in the US. So we have the O1 visa, the L1 visa, and the H1B visa. Now, let's move on to the next slide and talk about the H1B visa. So the H1B visa, I think many of you know this, is a specialty occupation visa. It's probably the most popular of the three. And it allows US employers to sponsor foreign workers in specialty occupation. So a specialty occupation is one that requires at least a bachelor's degree or higher in a related field. So you must have at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent or higher. If you don't have a bachelor's degree, you can use experience as an alternative, but you need at least, I would say, 12 years of experience to make that equivalency. It's 3 years of experience to 1 year of study. But assuming that everyone here has a degree or will obtain a degree, most people qualify on that basis. Now, the H-1B is employer sponsored, so you do need a company that is willing to sponsor your work visa. There is a lottery system that happens every year in March, and there's about a 20 to 30% chance of getting selected. You do have a slightly higher chance of getting selected if you have a US master's degree or higher. And then there is a cap of 85,000 visas that are issued each year for H-1B workers. If you could move on to the next slide. So for H-1Bs, a couple of requirements. The degree must be specific to the occupation. So if you are going to be working as a software developer, then it's ideal to have a degree in computer science or software engineering or something that's related to what you're going to be doing. Same thing for accountant, right? So if you're going to be an accountant, having a degree in finance or accounting lines you up pretty well with the position. If you have a degree that's unrelated or too generic, it could trigger an RFE, meaning that USCIS could issue what's called a request for evidence. They might challenge it on that basis. So it's important to note that for the H-1B, it's important to understand the role and determine whether or not your degree aligns with that role before applying for the visa. Now, it is valid for up to 6 years in total. And if you have a spouse and kids, they can qualify for the H-4 dependent visa. The big advantage with the H-1B is that if you have an approved I-140, so if your employer sponsors you for a green card and you get an approved I-140 through that process, you can extend your H-1B indefinitely beyond the 6 years until you receive your green card. And this is important for especially Indian and Chinese nationals who have very long wait times under the EB2 or EB3 categories. I've seen clients with H-1B who have had H-1B visas for like 20 years. So it really allows them to to live and continue working in the US until they receive their green cards, which is a huge benefit. No other visa provides this benefit. So that's the H-1B. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and I guess I'll just take the questions at the end because I see them on the slides. O1 visa. So the O1 visa is for individuals of extraordinary ability, and that's exactly what the regulations state. Individuals who have demonstrated a high level of achievement, individuals who are distinguished in their profession, whatever that profession is. Now, the O1 visa can apply to the arts, sciences, business, athletics, motion picture and television. It can be used by, almost any profession or any industry out there who want to work in the US. If you move on to the next slide, that would be great. All right. The thing I like about the O1 visa, unlike the H1B, there is not an annual cap on it. And there isn't a degree requirement as well. So if you don't have a bachelor's degree, or maybe you didn't finish your program, you could apply for an O1 visa. But what you have to do is qualify for at least 3 out of the 8 criteria that are listed right here. Now, we've done O1 visas for tattoo artists, right? For engineers, for marketing managers, for entrepreneurs, for people in a wide variety of industries across the board. So you're not limited. It's not limited to a particular industry or occupation. Whereas the H1B is more focused on that bachelor's degree and that specific occupation being related to the bachelor's degree. Now, for the O1 visa, there are 8 criteria, and you only need to meet 3 to qualify, right? So the first one asks you to show whether or not you've won, prizes or awards that are nationally or internationally recognized. This could be in your home country, or this could be in the United States. It doesn't matter where it is. The second one is memberships in professional associations. Were you invited to join maybe an honor society, for example, right? Because of some contributions that you've made or your hard work. Number 3, have you been featured in any media for the work that you've done? Number 4, have you judged the work of your peers in some professional capacity? For example, maybe you were invited to judge the work of your peers at a conference or some type of competition that's related to what your endeavor is. Number 5, evidence that you've made significant contributions to your field. Number 6, articles in major publications. So maybe you've written articles and published them in trade journals or other major media, and there's work to show for that, right? Number 7, do you command a high salary in relation to others in your field? So for the tattoo artist case that we did, this guy, he had his own tattoo shop, but he was very successful. He did tattoos for people from, I think, from the Brazilian football team. And so he was pretty popular within his industry, and his salary was significantly higher than the average salary for a tattoo artist. And so we were able to do some research and identify the salary data to make that comparison, right? So if you're going to be working as, maybe like a software engineer for a company, we'd have to look at the salary for software engineers, maybe within that location or within the US, and compare your salary to that. And then we have authorship of scholarly articles, right? So peer-reviewed, published articles are super important for this. So what I tell people is, you're looking at this criteria right now and you're wondering, man, I don't have most of these, or maybe you have some of them, but you want to get more. Ask yourself the question, what can I do today to position myself for the O1 visa after my OPT expires? Could I get published, right? Could I compete in competitions to potentially win awards and prizes? Can I get invited to a few prestigious associations, right? Asking yourself, like, what can you do today to prepare yourself for that in the future? Because sometimes it could take, at least a year to do the necessary work, to sort of like tailor your resume to the requirements of an O1 visa. And that's why I'm here today, is to sort of like coach you guys and tell you like what you need to do or start thinking about to prepare yourself for this. The O1 visa is valid for up to 3 years and can be extended indefinitely. And unlike the H1B visa, you don't need a company to necessarily sponsor you. Let's say you're self-employed and you're working as a consultant or a contractor. You can work for multiple different companies under the O1 visa. So it gives you a lot more flexibility, unlike the H1B. There isn't a strict degree requirement, but what you must prove is extraordinary ability within your field, and that requires you to prove at least 3 out of the 8 criteria. And at Francis Law, we like to demonstrate at least 5 criteria before moving forward with a case. Just in case USCIS disagrees with one, we can always fall back on the other. In rare cases, we would go through with 3, but those 3 have to be really strong, right? And indisputable. But in most cases, we like to see at least 5. So that's the O1 visa. Let's talk about the L1 visa. All right, so the L1 visa. Let's say you are working for a company that is based in Japan, for argument's sake. And you've been working there for at least 1 year. Maybe you're a manager, or maybe you are a project manager, or someone who works in a specialized knowledge capacity. And that company wants to bring you to their US office to work. The ideal visa that the company would use is called the L1 visa. And it's called the intra-company transfer visa. Now, the purpose of the visa was to allow companies, multinational companies, to transfer their personnel across borders seamlessly, right? To facilitate easier trade and business expansion. That's the purpose of it, right? It doesn't matter if you're Google or Apple or a small, micro company that has, 10 to 20 people. The L1 can be used by, any industry, any company, and it facilitates the transfer of employees. Now, let's say, and this is a great way to use the O1, right? Like, let's say, you graduate and, your OPT is about to run out and you're working for a company. Maybe they try to get you into the H1B lottery, and it didn't work out. Let's say that same company has an office in Japan or anywhere else around the world, right? What they would do is send you overseas for 1 year, 12 months, and have you work as a manager or as a specialized knowledge employee. And you'd work there for a year, and then you would come back to the US on an L1 visa. And that L1 visa will allow you to work in the US for up to 5 to 7 years. So it's a great way to, it's a great workaround, if the H1B visa doesn't work out, or if you're not qualified for the O1 visa. It's one of my favorite visas because it's so straightforward and the requirements are, very direct. So if you meet all the requirements, chances are, you'll get it. The approval rates are very high. If you go to the next slide, that would be great. So a couple of things about the L1 visa. The company has to show a qualifying relationship. So the foreign company, let's say it's in Japan, must be either a parent or subsidiary of the US company. So they have to be related to each other. They can't be 2 different companies that have no corporate relationship. The employment abroad must be at least for 1 year, and you must be coming to the US to serve in a managerial or executive capacity. Now, there is also an offshoot of the L1 called the L1 New Office Petition, and this is for startups and for folks who are more entrepreneurial. So let's say you own a company overseas and that company does not have an office in the US. You can apply for what's called an L1 New Office Petition to to set up shop here in the US. And that new office petition will allow you to transfer your business to the United States. And with that comes, transferring yourself and your employment as well. And we did one for example, for a family from Jamaica last year. They own a business in Jamaica that installs surveillance cameras on different commercial properties. And we applied for an L1 new office visa because they had multiple offers to execute contracts here in the US, and they got approved. And the owner and his family, they're all here right now on an L1 visa. So it's a great way to get your foot in the door, especially if some of you might maybe have owned businesses overseas, and you can use that business as leverage to get a green card here in the US, because the L1 visa, it does put you on the green card track, and you could either get the EB1C green card, or you could go through the perm process as well. So it's a lot easier to get a green card from the L1 visa compared to the O1 visa, for example, or even the H1B. If you've worked as a manager or executive abroad and in the US, you can get a green card. It's called the EB1C. So that's something that's important to just note. And if you have a spouse or children, they can come here on the L2 visa as well. And your spouse can work on the L2 visa. So the L1 visa is a great opportunity for those who are working for multinational companies or startups that want to move to the US. Let's see. Next slide, please. All right, so those were the main employment-based visa categories that we should consider after OPT or even after graduation. I would recommend that you start thinking about these options even before you graduate, because sometimes it could take years to really prepare and position yourself for some of these visa categories. And it's all about having multiple options. So, if you could potentially use the L1 visa or the O1 and the O1 visa, why not try to position yourselves for both of them, right? If possible. So sometimes, students will come to me at the very end of their OPT and they want to find a solution. But sometimes it doesn't really work that way. Sometimes you have to plan ahead. So we're going to talk about green cards right now. So the green card options, they're also called immigrant visas. So immigrant visas just mean permanent residency. And these are the three main categories that you'll come across. You have the EB1A, the EB2 national interest waiver, and then the EB2 and the EB3 through the perm labor certification. We also have the EB1C, which I didn't list on this. I'm not going to talk about that because it's pretty much identical to the L1 visa. The only thing with the EB1C is that you have to prove that you worked as a manager or executive overseas, and that you'll continue to do the same in the US. If you can prove those two things, you'll get a green card. So the EB1C is pretty much identical to the L1 visa. It is the easiest green card category to obtain if you qualify for it. And so we probably won't spend too much time talking about that. We'll focus on the more nuanced types, which are these three right here. So let's talk about the EB1A. So the EB1A is like the big brother to the O1 visa. You see that it says, EB1A for individuals of extraordinary ability. It is pretty much identical to the O1. The O1 is also for individuals of extraordinary ability. The only difference is that the O1 is temporary and the EB1A provides a pathway to permanent residency, right? It's permanent. It gives you that green card, which is what most people want. So like the O1 visa, the EB1A allows you to demonstrate your ability in any field, like the sciences, arts, business, athletics. It's not limited to any particular industry. And if you move on to the next slide, I'll talk about some other things. It is a fast track to the green card, so you can get a decision within 15 business days. So we applied for an EB1A for a F1 student at the end of January this year, right? And within 10 days, he had his approval. And whenever you get an EB1A approved, it's like walking into a DMV, right, and taking a ticket number. This is for any green card or immigrant visa, right? It's like you walk into the DMV or a bank and you take that ticket number and you got to sit and wait for the person at the front desk to call your ticket number. That's how the visa bulletin works. So when you apply for an EB1A and it gets approved, you can apply for that green card immediately because the visa numbers are available for the EB1A. Green cards are available immediately. Whereas with the EB2 and the EB3, sometimes you might have to wait up to, sometimes 10, 20 years if you're from India or China. But if you're from anywhere else, it's probably around 2 to 3 years. But for the EB1A, once it's approved, you can get your green card. You can apply for it immediately. So for this international student that we helped earlier this year, he applied for the green card immediately after the EB1A was approved. We helped him with it, and he's probably going to get his green card by the end of this month, right? And he just graduated. So what that tells you is that you don't have to wait until your OPT expires to apply for a green card. You could apply for it at any time, but you want to apply for it at the right time when you're qualified, right? So it's always on a case-by-case basis. For this particular person, his resume was very impressive and was a slam dunk EB1A case. For some other people, we might have to work with them and coach them on developing their resume and their evidence a bit more. So if you look at the requirements here on the screen, there are 10 requirements. The O1 has 8, the EB1A has 2 more, so it brings it up to 10. But to qualify, you must meet at least 3 out of the 10 criteria. Again, we at Francis Law, we like to prove at least 5, ideally, just in case they disagree with one, and we can always fall back on the other. And they are identical to the O1. So have you won national or international prizes? Have you been invited to prestigious associations, right? And these are associations that someone like myself could not join, right? Or Erica, for example. Like, it has to be specific to your industry. You have to have demonstrated some extraordinary achievement or ability, and you were invited to join as a result of your on the basis of merit. Whether or not you were featured in publications, high salary, scholarly articles, significant contributions. The criteria are very identical to the O1A, but the difference with the EB1A is that USCIS tends to they ramp up the scrutiny a little bit more with the EB1A, right? So, it's possible that you could be approved for an O1 visa, but denied for an EB1A, because you're going to look at it with a bit more scrutiny. They want to see that you're the best of the best, that you have some type of that you have at least national or international recognition within your field, and it's a bit of a step up from the O1 visa. So if you qualify for the EB1A, it's a great opportunity to get a green card really fast. It's probably the fastest way to get a green card besides marrying a U.S. citizen, and the processing time is pretty quick as well. So that's the EB1A. Let's talk about the next slide, which is the next visa category. This is the EB2 National Interest Waiver. So I think a lot of people have heard about this one. So this is also a self-sponsored green card. So I should also mention that the EB1A as well as the EB2 National Interest Waiver are self-sponsored green cards. And what that means is you don't need an employer or a relative or anyone to sponsor you or support your EB1A or EB2 NIW. You can apply for it on your own, based on your own merit. And that gives you a lot of flexibility and control. Now, the question is, will you qualify for it, right? So for the EB2 NIW, the entire idea behind it is that, if you have a certain skill set or endeavor, or if you are seeking to address something that solves a national issue or something that serves the national interest of the US, right? You can get a green card on that basis. The idea behind it was to allow the US to So attract the best and brightest who can address like, issues concerning US like national interest, whether it's national security, whether it's like, AI, technology, whatever it is, as long as we can prove that your work serves national interest, we can qualify you for an EB2 NIW. Now, the EB2 NIW, the processing time under premium processing is 45 business days. So it takes a little bit longer than the EB1A, which takes 15 business days, but it's still a lot faster than the other green card opportunities that are out there. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk more about that. So there are a couple requirements with the EB2 NIW. You must prove that you have an advanced degree, so a US master's degree or higher, or its equivalent. If you don't have have an advanced degree, you must demonstrate exceptional ability. And exceptional ability doesn't mean extraordinary ability. Like within the context of like the EB1A, there are different requirements and different factors that they take into consideration for that. But that's the idea. In addition to that, you must prove that your work has substantial merit and national importance. And this is where it becomes tricky, because the reviewing officer wants proof. They want to be convinced that your proposed endeavor will serve the national interests of the US. Not just your employer, not just your interests, but the interests of hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people just beyond yourself, right? So I'll give you an example. There's one client, he is an aviation procurement specialist. So he works with different manufacturers to source airplane parts, right? And then he's responsible for supplying these airplane parts to all the major airlines that we use: American, Delta, United. And so his job is very critical, because he's ensuring that all of these parts that he's sourcing is compliant with the FAA regulations, with international regulations. He has a lot of control over that process, and he also has a pilot license and a few other qualifications, right? So that's a strong NIW case. Another one is someone who works in AI. He is actually the chief technology officer of a very small startup here in DC that does it's like an AI search engine for clinical trials, for example, right? And so they help doctors and patients find clinical trials for whatever medical purposes that they need. And they receive funding and have a lot of support. And that is a very strong NIW petition. So, it's not limited to any industry. I think what you have to show is that, your work is critical and that it serves national interests. Now, if you move on to the next slide, for NIWs, there are a list of professions that receive special consideration from the US government. These are typically STEM professions. So if you fall under any one of these areas, you can potentially increase your chances for an NIW approval. And I know the screen is pretty small, so I'll read out a few of them. Advanced computing, advanced engineering materials, artificial intelligence, clean energy generation, hypersonics, data security, cybersecurity, data privacy, space technologies. So, if you're not on this list, it doesn't mean that you're barred or, precluded from applying for the NIW. It just means that they give special consideration to these industries because of the need right now. So that's it for the EB2 NIW. Let's move on to the PERM labor certification. So this is our last green card category that we'll talk about. Unlike the EB1A and EB2 NIW, the PERM is employer sponsored. So you do need a company to sponsor you for the PERM for it to work. You can't self-petition or self-sponsor for a PERM case. So this is available to those who, you have a company that has your back and they're willing to sponsor you for a green card and willing to pay for that process, right? Some companies might not be willing, but if you're lucky enough to find a company, I would say take up the opportunity. So the purpose of the perm is to test the labor market, right? The company, your employer, is essentially telling the US government that there are no qualified American workers for this particular job. Therefore, you should be given a green card to permanently work in the United States. That's the entire idea behind the perm. So we're doing like labor market testing, we're screening applicants, we're doing job postings. We have to do everything that it takes to find American workers to fill that role. And if we can't find them, then we can essentially petition you for a green card. That's the idea behind the perm. It was created to protect the U.S. labor market, right? So the perm process does take a longer time compared to the other green card categories out there. It could take around, I would say, on average 3 years to really complete. And it could take a little longer before you get the green card in your hand. But for many people, it is the best route because they might not qualify for the EB2 NIW and they might not qualify for the EB1A. So the default is usually the perm process. Because if you have a bachelor's degree or higher, and if you're working in a specific industry, you're probably going to get it through the perm. And the approval rates for the perm are significantly higher than self-sponsored visas. I've never had a perm denial before, knock on wood, but I would say the approval rates are in the high 90%, like 99%. And this is not for me, it's for like other colleagues I know as well that do these cases. They're pretty high because unless we find a U.S. worker that's qualified for the role, in which case we can find ways to sort of work around that, but the approval rates are pretty high. Whereas with EB2 NIWs, the approval rates nationally right now are around 65%. So it took a dip after Trump took office. And I think that's because they're trying to get rid of the low quality petitions. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, so the perm it's sort of broken down into like 3 different steps. The recruitment is the main process that people tend to know about, where you're posting jobs on different sources with different websites, and it takes around 3 to 4 years to get the green card through that process. If you have a family, wife and kids, husband or kids, they can join you as well as dependents. So it's probably not the most attractive option, but it definitely is a sure way to get a green card through employer sponsorship. Next slide, please. And so a couple takeaways. So for self-sponsorship, right, it offers you more flexibility and control over your immigration journey. It's a great option for, whether you're an entrepreneur, independent contractor, or international student. Obviously, it makes a huge difference in your journey. Employer sponsorship is also a good opportunity as well, but sometimes companies might not be willing to do that. There might be certain questions on job. We all know that question on job applications, right? That asks, will you require visa sponsorship in the future? And most times when you check yes to that question, it's almost like it screens you out almost automatically. When you obtain your green card through self-sponsorship, you can respond no to that question because you don't need employer sponsorship, right? But if you have no other option, I would say employer sponsorship is a solid pathway as well. And just remember, green cards can take years to obtain, at least sometimes 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the circumstances. So having a work visa to fill that gap is key if you're available, if you're qualified for it. So, we all want to get that green card and citizenship at some point, but sometimes we have to think in the short term to midterm and use these temporary work visas to our advantage. Next slide, please. So thank you guys for joining. That's my Instagram page. It was a pleasure being here. I look forward to having more talks like this, but I hope you found it useful and the information helpful. I post content on Instagram weekly. So if you're interested, go over there and follow me, and happy to meet with anyone here who would like to have a consultation about their specific situation. I'm always happy to do that. You could go on my website at francislawimmigration.com and book some time to talk with me, and I'll be happy to do that. So thank you very much. I'm going to answer some questions right now from the group. So first question that I see here is, I'm looking to explore my chances with the EB2 NIW pathway in addition to the H1B path after graduation. What can I do to strengthen my case if I get an RFE? RFE means request for additional evidence. And why don't many international students know about this visa? So that's why I'm here, to raise awareness about this visa category. I think for the NIW, the key is to show that you have a proposed endeavor that serves the national interest, right? So if you're about to graduate and you don't have a job lined up, or if you don't have a business plan or any concrete plans to do something with your degree or with your knowledge and expertise, then you're not going to be in the best spot to apply for an NIW, right? Even though it's self-sponsored and you don't need a company or a job offer to apply for the NIW, USCIS wants to see that you have a proposed endeavor. What are you going to do, right? How are you going to serve or address the national interest of the United States? Are you going to start a business? Well, where's the business plan? Was it already registered? Did you already receive funding? Do you have letters from potential stakeholders who would want to do business with you, right? Or do you plan to work with a company that's in maybe a critical and emerging sector of the economy? And if so, do you have a job offer? What exactly will you be doing for the company, right? Will your work impact, thousands or tens of thousands of people outside, beyond your employer, right? Not just making profits for your company, but impacting lives outside the company or serving some national interest outside the company's ability to generate revenue, right? So that's the key to being successful with an EB2 NIW. Second question is, any information about J1 students being affected by the embassy pause? As far as I'm concerned, and Erica, you can chime in if you want, the pause is only affecting international students. I didn't read about anything, any pause on the J1 visas.
There is a pause on all J's right now too. I heard just from some folks in the comments this morning, in comments of one of my videos, that some countries are opening up J's, but there is a full J1, all categories, full pause on all J1 visa interviews. Yeah.
Got it.
I'll also mention, I posted a video earlier. The U.S. Department of State gives updates on Tuesdays and Thursdays in their press briefing. So if you're available to watch that at 2 p.m., if you're curious about the student visa pause, I recommend doing that.
Thank you, Erica. Appreciate that. So, next question was, after receiving my bachelor's, I plan on doing OPT. At what point should I start speaking to my employer about sponsorship? I mean, I think it's a conversation that you should have as soon as possible. Maybe after you get your foot in the door, or depending on the relationship you have with the company, you might feel comfortable talking about that before, right? Some companies might not be inclined to do it, or might not be interested in doing it because they have to spend a lot of money on that process. But I would say, if you get a job offer and you start working with a company, I don't think it hurts to ask the question, hey, would you guys be willing to sponsor my green card at some point in the future, right? No, just be careful with that, because some companies will string you on and they'll say, yes, of course, and kind of kick the can down the road. So it's good to have something in writing if possible, even if it's just an email, and understand the terms. Like, are you going to be subject to certain, to certain standards? Maybe, for some companies, for example, they want their employees to work with them for at least 3 years or, 2 years, and, achieve a certain score on their performance reviews before being considered to receive company sponsorship, right? They want to see that you've been working with them for some time. So just understand the terms and conditions of their green card, their internal green card policy, if they have one. And if they don't have one, try to figure that out with them as early as possible. Because what you don't want to happen is you get to the end of the road where your OPT is going to expire, and then your employer kind of leaves you stranded, right? So if you are working with a company and it's clear to you that they don't intend to sponsor you for a green card, you should start looking for a different company as soon as you can that can sponsor you for a green card. Or if you have a strong enough self-sponsored case, pursue that as well. And sometimes I would recommend pursuing both, because if the self-sponsored case doesn't work out, you can always fall back on having a different company that is willing to sponsor you. So let me move on to the next one because we're running up on time. Um, how do I how do I start positioning myself for an O1 or EB1 visa as a first year MBA student? So I would probably do this. So if you go to francislawImmigration.com, I list all requirements for the O1 and EB1A visas. So, and you can look it up on Google as well. You can go on, any website might have them. USCIS.com has them as well. I also have them on my website. So print out the requirements, the criteria, and work towards them. Create a checklist. Figure out what you can qualify for today and what you could qualify for in the next 2 to 3 years, or however many time you need to position yourself for that visa, right? And treat it like a long-term plan. Sometimes you might not be able to get, an award or prize or scholarly article overnight, but you could do it over the course of, several years, right? So I would say the sooner the better. And be careful what major you choose, and have an idea of how you intend to use your major in the future, right? So that's how I would position myself and take those considerations. Let's see. I'm going to take the generic questions. For those of you with very specific questions, I think we should jump on a consultation because it's going to be really hard to address that for everyone to really understand and make sense of. Next question is, can you get a green card if you have family members in the US who have green cards? Yes, your family members having green cards don't impact your ability to get your own green card. If they are immediate relatives like parents or siblings, they can sponsor you. I was sponsored by a relative. So my aunt I think she was a US citizen at the time. She sponsored us, and that worked. She sponsored my mom, and I came as a derivative of my mom. So if your family members already have green cards, it doesn't impact your ability to get a green card. And you can pursue different pathways. So you could pursue the family pathway while you're pursuing the employment-based pathway. You could take on as many different pathways at the same time as you want. The question is, can you afford to do that, because it does get expensive, and do you qualify for all the pathways that you are interested in? So those are the limitations. Let's see. So someone asked, how do I reach Xavier Francis? You can reach me on francislawImmigration.com, or my Instagram profile. My Instagram handle is there. It's xfrancislaw. Or if you just Google Xavier Francis immigration lawyer, I'll pop up. You'll find me in multiple sources. You can always get in touch with me. Someone asks, I recently graduated with my master's degree in economics and minor in global economics. I'm planning on applying for the EB2 visa with a proposal to help boost economic growth in the US and reduce offshoring to create more employment for USA citizens. How do I make my proposal stronger? So I would love to see whether or not you have either a job offer lined up with a company that's going to help facilitate this, or if you're going to become more of an independent consultant. And if so, what specific data points can you provide to show that there is a need, there is an issue, and how specifically are you going to address this issue, right? And so EB2 NIWs is all about providing objective evidence as much as possible. And then sort of demonstrating how your expertise is going to help address this. and whether or not you have potential stakeholders who are already interested in the work that you set out to do, and have sort of like express an interest in working with you in the future, whether it's an employer or potential clients. And if you want to talk more about this, I think jumping on a consultation would be ideal. I can take a look at your resume and help you figure out a strategic plan for that. Question is, can you get your work permit before the green card with the EB3, and when can you get the work permit with the EB3? So the EB3 or EB2 or EB1A, all of those EB visas, they don't provide work authorization. They don't provide a work permit. You only get work authorization at the time you are invited to apply for a green card. Like when you walk into the bank and you get that ticket number, like it's the same way, like the visa bulletin works in that same way. So when you apply for an EB2 or EB3 or EB1A, you get a priority date, and that priority date is like a ticket number. And each month, the Department of State calls up those priority dates that are invited to apply for permanent residency. When your priority date is called, you apply for the green card through an adjustment of status. And when you apply for that adjustment of status, you can apply for a work permit, right? And that's how you could get a work permit through the green card or through the employment-based immigrant visa categories. It takes some waiting. And that's why we emphasize the work visas, because the H-1B, the L-1, the O-1 visa, those visas are going to allow you to work in the immediate future, right? Sometimes we can't wait 2, 3, 5 years to get a green card. We got to work and start making money today. And so those work visas are essential because they fill that gap between, applying for the green card and actually getting it. So I'm currently on OPT, and I have been looking for sponsors, but with no success. I do work and do consultancy. I have a master's in cybersecurity management. I maintain data and do design and a lot more data and security. I think, and the question is the NIW a good pathway for me? I think so. I think, the cybersecurity falls within the critical and emerging technology list. I would want to take a look at your resume in more detail and get a better understanding of what you do for work and what your consultancy entails, and figure out maybe a business plan that's a bit more concrete. Get an idea of like who your clients are, the feedback from them, the impact of your work on individuals or companies, and from a cybersecurity standpoint, and how that's protecting U.S. businesses, right? So I think when you have a degree in cybersecurity or any other critical and emerging sector or field, I think you're going to receive special consideration for the NIW, but it doesn't automatically mean that you will be approved. So you got to be very strategic in how you tell that story and lay out the evidence, and I'm happy to do that with you on a consultation. All right. 2 more questions. Maybe we'll take one more because we have 1 minute left. I'll take the shorter one. Can green card holders sponsor brothers and siblings or just citizens? Green card holders can sponsor their siblings as well. The wait time is longer, and I believe the visa bulletin has the specific wait times posted on their website. I'll have to double check that. But yes, green card holders can sponsor their children, and I believe they can also sponsor their brothers and sisters as well. The next question is, last question. I'm a graduate student getting my master's in computer information systems. I have an active company back home which deals on airline tickets and reservations. I've registered an online company here in the US. So I would say if you have a company back home, you should look into an L1 visa. I think that would be a great opportunity to leverage that visa. And I would love to take a look at your resume to see what I could do to help. I always recommend the L1 visa to those who own companies overseas, because you can bypass a lot of headache and obstacles by having a business. So that's what I would recommend. All right, everyone, we're up on time. That's it for questions. I'll pass it back to Erica.
Yes, thank you so much, Xavier. This was a great session. And I have to say, I have gone to a lot of sessions for international students interested in learning about work visas. And this one has been the most detailed, the most focused on like advice for preparing. So thank you so much for that. I know we talked about potentially doing this again. Maybe we can have slides that are portrait instead of landscape next time so they can be read. But again, thank you so much. For anyone who wants to follow him, hopefully you already did and pulled up his website, francislawimmigration.com. Find him on Instagram where he's very active. He's also pretty active on LinkedIn as well. And thank you all for tuning in today. Sorry, there was, I think, one question that we couldn't address. Some of the questions that are more like international student strategy focused, I'm happy to help address those when I go live on Saturdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I talk about job search strategies, starting the conversation with employers about sponsorship, how to find international friendly employers. So if you want that more like practical navigating the job search advice, I'm happy to help with that. All right. So I do have to get back to work. And I'm sure you do too. Xavier, thank you so much again. And I will catch up with you. I'll reach out to you afterwards and we can chat a little bit more. So,
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for attending.
thank you. And this recording will be posted. And as long as Xavier is okay, I can also upload the slides to my Linktree. Is that okay with you?
Perfectly okay with me.
Okay, great. So look for the slides in the Linktree. I'll do a video when those are ready for your access. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.